Welcome to our March edition of Talent Matters. This month, we're going to be talking about personal accountability.
Mm-hmm. When I've been speaking to a lot of Vistage groups and I go around the room and I ask everybody, what's your biggest people problem other than we can't find any? At least a third of the people will say accountability.
Yeah, every month we ask for suggestions on future webcasts, and personal accountability comes up over and over again. So we figured we'd tackle it today. There's a lot of unique ways in which to deal with this, and we're going to just give you some ideas on how to better manage the accountability within the organization.
Which is kind of funny because we always go through, hey, this is going to be about 30 to 40 minutes long, but accountability could be something we talk about for 2 hours. But it's going to be about 30 to 40 minutes long, depending on how excited we get about certain slides. You can put your comments in the chat and we will address those right away. And tomorrow you will get the resources and the recording from this. Oh, did we say we're John and Cindy
I'm
Gabe?
John Gabe. This is Cindy Gabe. We are talent experts in the workplace, and personal accountability is one of the big focuses on that.
And we've been doing this now officially for 30
That's
years
right.
and a few
Happy
days.
birthday.
Yeah. So we've got a lot of examples, a lot of experience with this. And it isn't easy. There's no easy pill or easy button. This is something you got to work at. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, so we mentioned why this podcast, we get asked about personal accountability regularly. We will tell you it is one of the characteristics we measure in candidates and in leaders, and inevitably it is one of the lower ranked skills, personal skills that humans have. We just
At least
aren't,
in the U.S.
Yeah, we just really aren't good at accountability, and it's important for execution and achieving some of the goals that organizations want. So understanding when you see it starting to break down, and how to manage the accountability process. It is a process. It isn't just like Cindy said, you can't just hit a button and make sure somebody's going to be accountable.
Right. And while we know out of the 23 personal skills that we measure, the mean in the U.S. is 22, so it is one of the lowest. It is not a generational issue. I know I hear that a lot too, that it tries to get blamed on the generation. It is not. It affects all of us. And it is rarely your direct report's problem. So you might have something to do with it. Maybe it's a little bit of both, but we'll help you figure out some of the, in some cases, it really is the problem with that particular individual. There are some people who don't want responsibility for anything, but not the majority of folks. The majority of people really want to be successful. They really want to please you, but their mind reading skills are just not very good.
And I love the quote from Churchill about greatness and responsibility. They go hand in hand, and that applies to organizations as well. Mm-hmm. So what are we going to cover today? We got a lot, as I mentioned.
It's a dense slide.
As I mentioned, there's a lot of different parts of accountability. We're going to touch on why it is so difficult in today's world, why it is at one of the lowest it's ever has been in today's world. We're going to talk about a tool that we recommend to deal with accountability, and a process around those tools. We're going to talk about using third-party coaches and the best way to use them within organizations to hold us accountable. And then using them in quarterly reviews we found to be really helpful. And I don't know that we can do one of these webcasts without talking about AI and in this case, how it comes into play with accountability. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk a little bit about the pros and cons in using artificial intelligence to hold us accountable. And then talk about a development plan and what that all entails for successful accountability.
One of the things that's really important to understand is this is just one aspect of somebody's work. This is just one aspect that needs to be addressed by leadership, but it is not a standalone. So if you aren't creating a relationship through your one-on-ones, if you don't have a good way of providing feedback that isn't accusatory and evaluative, and you can't create conversations and collaboration around this stuff, that the process is never going to be as effective. So if you want to understand how it kind of all comes together, you can check out the Leadership Essentials Playbook in our Leadership Academy. But this is one piece. You can't do this and nothing else. it's going to require some different things together.
And for the purposes of this conversation, we're framing personal accountability in the leader-direct report relationship.
Correct.
Personal accountability can cross peers as well as holding direct reports, holding their leader accountable. But most of the conversation and the tools and the approaches are going to be from the leader to the direct report.
I would not suggest trying to do this with a spouse either. It maybe could work with kids, but generally speaking, we're addressing this from the workplace.
So a little bit about us. As Cindy mentioned, we just crossed our 30th year anniversary. Our focus is largely in, we started in Detroit. We're in Charlotte now in both cases, locations actually. We focus on hiring and in leadership. Getting the right people on the right bus and getting them doing the right things is really the focus here.
And all of that falls into the Leadership Academy. You can see in the outer ring, it starts with the hiring process coach. That's getting the right people in the right seats. Notice that second ring, look at the bottom. It says the accountability system. So there is a system for then holding people accountable. And those are kind of the foundational pieces. And then there are leadership development activities that fall in the center. So that's really what we focus on. How do we get the right people in the right seats? And if you've hired the superstar, how do we then get superstar performance out of them?
Mm-hmm. So it's no surprise that accountability is not an easy thing to achieve. Everybody thinks somebody else needs to be held accountable and that they're fine the way they are. So that's really the first thing that one needs to do is understand that personal accountability is hard for us all, including ourselves. Sometimes it's difficult because we're not really sure what to be held accountable to, and that those clarifications are important. The expectations need to be clearly laid out. What does success look like? That needs to be defined as well when you're trying to hold somebody accountable, and you need to know what you're being held accountable to. And it's not necessarily something personal. It's more about a contribution to the organization. Sometimes personal accountability can be weaponized or held personal. And then oftentimes the best way to deal with it is with a process because it is so difficult to do.
Well, and I think the other thing to consider is there is a direct correlation, maybe not a causation sometimes, but there's a direct correlation between how clear someone is about the expectations of their job and what their personal accountability is. Mm-hmm. There are some people who are like Teflon man, like nothing sticks in there, never accountable for anything. But that's the rare person. So there is this direct correlation. As a result, sometimes the people who have been with you longest have the least amount of accountability. And the reason is when they first hired in, oh my gosh, they were superstars, right? Oh, I can't believe you're this good. Hey, since you're so good at this, can you do this too? And can you do this? And can you do this? And in my brain, it becomes like one of those Dairy Queen massive banana splits that nobody can possibly tackle on their own. And the challenge is the more we layer on top of somebody who says, sure, because they don't want to disappoint you, the less they understand what they can let go of. And they're less likely to let go of the things they were doing in the very beginning because those are the things that earn them the kudos. So why would I stop doing those things? And so they keep trying to do it all, and it's impossible. So they are unclear. They are more unclear than somebody who just comes in on what is actually responsible.
Yeah, and I would think that's the crux of why it is so difficult is because we generally aren't very clear on what the expectations are and what somebody's being held accountable to. And you're right, our mind reading skills are not great. And as a result, we generally aren't thinking that accountability is an issue.
One of the things I ask the groups that I'm speaking to consider, I might have a group of 8, I might have a group of 100. And I'll ask them to raise their hand if they got up this morning thinking, how can I be a loser today? And other than a wise guy or two, nobody raises their hand. All of us want to please. We want to get kudos for being awesome, for contributing. We want to feel like we're contributing something significant to the organization. We don't go out of our way looking to annoy people. And so if we can start with that premise, then what is it this person needs in order to be wildly successful? And that changes things instead of thinking they just don't want responsibility.
Right. So not only is it difficult, in today's world, it is one of the more difficult personal skills for us to master. The culture within society is changing, whether it's social media, whether it's politics, whatever it is, there's this slipperiness going on right now that makes personal accountability that much more difficult to expect. And it could be cultural, it could be within the organization, the whole hybrid working, virtual, not virtual or in office. That's creating accountability challenges. Leaders are more reluctant today to give feedback, whether it's because they're not adept at that or they're fearful of some legal ramification. So there's a culture of instability, we think, that is causing a lot of this lack of personal accountability that is at an all-time low today.
Yeah, I do think that a lot of leaders feel like they're walking on eggshells when they're trying to give somebody feedback. The other thing is most leaders also want to be successful as leaders, but rarely have any of them gone through any leadership development. Lunch and learns don't count. You're not going to learn much from that. But they haven't gone through some leadership development. They don't really know how to give feedback. And the last thing they want to do is offend somebody. One of the things that I think most people don't understand, or most direct reports don't understand, is leaders are reluctant to let somebody go or give somebody some course correction feedback because they believe that some of it might be their own fault. Maybe I wasn't clear. Maybe I didn't lay out the parameters well enough. So I need to give this person feedback, but I'm not trying to assign blame. I'm not trying to demoralize them. And they don't know how. And there's all kinds of things about the Oreo cookie or the sandwich, like give some praise and then give a course correction, another praise, which doesn't really work. And so they're all struggling with, how do I do this in a way that's constructive?
You raise a good point. I hadn't really thought about it like that before, but the reason personal accountability is so low today is a result of our leadership skills not being as well defined and developed as they had been in the past. And that could be for a variety of reasons. It could be because of the virtualization of the office place. It could be because of some of the challenges the next generation is having. But as a result, our feedback skills aren't as good, which means it's difficult to hold team members accountable.
The other challenge is when it comes to feedback, there really should be a 3-to-1 ratio. And those of us who've raised kids in sports know that the coaches are always told 3-to-1. You got to give 3 praises for every 1 course correction. And I always tell people, if you can't come up with 3 nice things to say about one of your direct reports, you got bigger problems that you need to address, right? So if you're giving some positive feedback along the way, then giving a course correction with the context isn't that hard. But if you haven't given anything and the only thing you're doing, if you call somebody in to your office to give them feedback and it's a 15, 20-minute conversation, which doesn't seem like much, but to them it's 15 to 20 minutes of talking about a problem that they have. And the first thing they're thinking of when they walk out of there is not how to fix the problem, but should I be updating my resume? Am I going to be gone? Because the only thing I got from this person, I don't get any praise. I don't get any kudos. I'm just getting the course corrections. And so that's the other challenge is that context that people need.
Sure. So we mentioned earlier, one of the best ways to hold somebody accountable is to make sure that they know what they're being held accountable for. We recommend some sort of scorecard or some sort of playbook that identifies what success factors are, how the job should be approached, what the expectations are. We happen to use a job scorecard that we implement with our clients, but whatever tool is in place for the leader and the direct report to be on the same page and know what the expectations are, and then you can focus on the accountability. Accountability without expectation or without definition is going to fail. And there needs to be some tool, some document, living, breathing, that gets reviewed and looked at regularly for accountability.
And in the last slide today, you're going to be able to download a sample of a job scorecard to give you an idea. This is not a job description. Let's be crystal clear. Job descriptions are useless. They're a laundry list of all the tasks you want someone to do that you could possibly imagine ever asking them over the course of the years they'll be in a job. So that does not provide clarity. In fact, if anything, it provides more ambiguity and more chaos. That's not going to cut it. So the job scorecard helps us understand not just what you want me to do, but how well do I have to do it? We're approaching March Madness now, where actually it starts today with the regional tournaments. And all the basketball players understand that they need to be able to make free throws. That's something they have. So if the coach says, go practice your free throws, they practice, all right? But if somebody says, you need to be shooting 75 to 80% of your free throws, you need to be making 75 to 80% of your free throws. Oh, that's a different scorecard. Now they understand what you mean, because otherwise I'm just playing horse, right? So that's the type of clarity they need, not just go do this, but how will I know if I've done it well enough to keep my job?
Right. And this scorecard needs to be tied to some sort of review process, whether it's a formal review or an informal review. It doesn't really matter. You got to not only make the free throws, but you got to follow up and review how well you're doing.
Yeah.
And that drives the accountability. So part of the accountability is knowing what needs to be done. The other part of the accountability is knowing you need to be accountable to that.
Right. And again, not overdoing the sports analogy, but going to practice day in and day out doesn't do much for you, but at least they get to go to a game. And then they can see, did they perform in game time when it was necessary and get things done? When we're at the workplace, it just feels like one practice day, one after the other. Whereas if you have a process for reviewing how well things are going and you get to see the score, it will make people feel much better about it because they get some feedback then on the things they're doing really well and some things that they might still need to brush up on.
So accountability isn't just a button that you press and expect it to happen. It isn't just putting a scorecard together and expecting it to happen. It isn't just a performance review and expecting it to happen. It needs to be a part of a process. There needs to be a rhythm associated with the review. There needs to be some document that everybody agrees to that lays out the accountable expectations. And we need to track how we're doing against that. It's that scoreboard that you would be referencing in the sports world. But
superstars love to know what the score is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Drucker said it best. If you're not measuring it, you're not going to be improving upon it. There needs to be a structured, measurable process in place for the accountability to happen.
And we usually recommend at least quarterly. So at least quarterly going through this job scorecard, giving people a feel for what's on track, what's off track. It also helps you as a leader to realize if something's just starting to slip, well, what resources do they need deployed? What obstacles do they need removed in order to get themselves back on track? Or maybe help with prioritization of conflicting priorities on their time. And so if you're doing this quarterly, you can adjust a little bit more frequently. There were studies done that show, do you know the answer to this one? How long does the average supervisor remember their direct report's performance?
3 weeks.
6. That's it. Unless it was something really dramatic. 6 weeks. So annual reviews are useless. It's a 6-week review, really. And so the way we structure the reviews, quarterly reviews, is there's an opportunity for the direct reports and the supervisor to be putting their comments throughout the quarter and remembering things that were accomplished along the way. So when they sit down to do the review, it might only take 20 to 30 minutes because they populated all of that and then they can talk about the most important things and what development's needed and things like this.
Yeah, but those big accountabilities don't necessarily should be reviewed more than just quarterly.
Right.
Deal with them in the regular one-on-ones.
Sure.
That's the best way to keep that rhythm going and not just review it every 90 days. So accountability needs to be driven home regularly.
Correct. And this is also assuming everything's going well. If someone's job is at risk, you need to make that at least a monthly review of the job scorecard. But to John's point, if you're doing weekly one-on-ones, if there's something particular that is a challenge for this individual,
right,
it needs to not be swept under the rug.
And you know, by reviewing them regularly, not just quarterly, you understand when you got a gap that's starting to occur on particular accountability, and you can begin to address it before it's too late.
Mm-hmm. I remember one of my mentor, my favorite boss. I was maybe 25, and I know people are going to have a tough time believing this, but I was one of 3 women in an entirely old white male office building, and I was terrified of these old white guys. And so when I had to go down this incredibly long hallway, if I wanted to go to the restroom or if I wanted to go for a cup of coffee, I would keep my head down and beeline it there. And my boss got some feedback that I was coming off as very arrogant, very aloof, blah, blah, blah. And he knew I was just mortified. So he said to me, so I understand this isn't true, but this is the perception. So we're going to change the perception. He said, this week, I want you to simply make eye contact as you go down the hall. That's it. So at the end of the week, that was horrible. I still remember it. And then he said, okay, this next week, I want you to nod before they say anything. And then the third time was, I want you to say hello before anything. But every week, because he wanted to build up my confidence, he wanted to make sure it was top of mind. This isn't something I could just blow off for 3 months and then come back later.
So oftentimes organizations want to bring in a third party or coach to help with the accountability process. Sometimes it's because of poor leadership. Sometimes it's because an outsider can bring in a different perspective. It's becoming more and more common for coaches to insert themselves within the workplace in a variety of levels. It isn't just the C-suite any longer that benefits from some sort of coach. Emerging leaders benefit from coaches. It just helps to create some objective dialogue. It can hold both the leader and the direct report accountable. It's very difficult for a direct report to hold their leader accountable,
especially if they're
without
new,
a coach.
Especially if it's a new employee.
Exactly. And the coach can kind of keep things on track. It's very common now, as we mentioned. It was funny. One of the major sports athletes has a nutrition coach, has a strength and conditioning coach, and it's a football player, and then has a position coach.
And probably a sports psychologist.
There may be somebody else. So having these third-party resources available drives home that accountability and helps an organization succeed.
To be clear, we are not suggesting that the coach become the intermediary. It is not the responsibility of the coach to provide the feedback, but it is to facilitate the conversation and to provide clarity. So sometimes a leader may throw something out there and the direct report is baffled and doesn't want to say, I don't understand what you mean. And that coach might pick up on it and say to the leader, hey, can you give us a little bit more context on when did this, and give us an example when this happened, et cetera. And so that's what we mean about facilitating that conversation.
Right. And the coach is very good at, from session to session, tracking what the commitments were and then following up to see how well somebody did on those commitments. Sometimes leaders and direct reports can drift for whatever reason, and the coach keeps them back on track on what they had agreed to for success and hold them accountable to it.
Yeah, and the accountability system that we have it started off mostly when the C-suite was getting hired, but to John's point, it's being used throughout organizations right now because leaders do feel a little like, I don't know how to do this, right? This is a great employee. I just need to give him some feedback. I don't want to spook him. I don't want to scare him. I don't want to, and so it really does help with that. Plus, knowing it's happening regularly, it is regularly scheduled. It's not a out of the blue walking up to somebody's desk and say, can I see you in my office for a minute? That's how it happened decades ago, and that was terrifying.
And I would argue this is one of the reasons that EOS implementers are so successful, is they hold an organization accountable through their quarterly rhythms or whatever it might be. But that's a really good example of a coach helping facilitate accountability.
For sure.
So one of the other advantages, as you mentioned, was these quarterly reviews, and having a coach involved in those quarterly reviews can make them much more productive. The coach can facilitate positive conversation. They can deal with issues before they get out of hand. But they're not the mediator within these quarterly review sessions. They're more of a facilitator of the conversation and not necessarily looking to take one side over the other.
Correct. And it's done in real time. It's not like talking to one and then talking to the other. I mean, there might be some of that to coach them on, try approaching your boss like this, right? See if that doesn't help. But it also allows them to be pretty clear about defining those outcomes that may have shifted from one quarter to the next. Anne, as many of you heard, was the world's greatest office manager. When we implemented a new CRM, it rocked her world for that quarter of priorities because she was a large part of getting it on board, from transitioning all the contacts from one to another, from teaching the rest of us how to use it without losing our minds. And so, she was already working a lot of hours. She's like, happy to do this. What do you want me to put off to the side for a moment? And so it gave us a perfect opportunity to reprioritize things, put some things on the shelf for the next quarter while that was the focus, and making sure that the expectations weren't very different for each of us.
And a good coach understands the personalities that they're dealing with and recognizes that they can't take the same facilitation approach for every group that they're working with, and understanding what motivates the two different parties makes for a better session as well.
And as behavior experts, we also know there are certain behavioral things. So as certain behavior types are receiving feedback, or might have to change priorities, some people's first reaction is, no, I can't do that. And you have to just realize that's part of that behavior style and give them a minute to digest it, or a day, and come back and say, okay, well, what can you do? What are some of the things you could do to try? But that's just part of certain behavior styles.
So can AI replace the coaches or make accountability easier? Maybe not. There's something valuable about having a human hold somebody accountable. It's way too easy to dismiss the bot or the agent or AI or whoever somebody may be engaged with to hold them accountable. There are some advantages to having AI be a part of the accountability process. It's predictable. It is not going to forget things. It's going to be consistent in its follow-up. But you don't have that judgment or that empathy or that ability to necessarily adjust when things change like a human does.
Yeah, I mean, there are things we've all done for years, even before it was considered AI. And you're one of the most passionate users of follop then, right?
Right. Well, that's a tool, but it isn't somebody's saying make sure you do this, right?
But he sets up this thing to follow up. Then he wants to remember 3 days from now to follow up with something, but. The other con about AI, so he can get this reminder saying, and then if he doesn't feel like it, he can just hit delete, right? Oops. Where if you're not wanting to deal with it. The other thing is that AI isn't going to pick up some subtleties. If a direct report is having a rough day or seems distracted, it's going to be easier for their direct supervisor to pick up some of those nuances in their body language, in their eye contact, in their voice controls that AI isn't going to be able to pick up, because maybe before you even get going on talking about accountability, is everything okay? What's going on? And maybe you need to do that first. And AI isn't able to do that as of yet.
Yeah, and I think it's just another example of where AI is an assistant. It isn't
Yes.
going to replace the accountability process. You may use the human holding somebody accountable quarterly and AI more weekly or regularly to help move through an accountable situation. But it isn't. I don't think it's going to replace coaches or accountability experts regularly.
Correct. It'll assist in reminders and things like this, evaluate the progress on stuff, but it isn't going to replace that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, who knows where it's going to go?
Yeah,
but right
today.
now, I don't know that an organization can turn over their accountability to a bot and find it to be successful.
Right.
One of the most important factors in achieving accountability is building it into an overall developmental plan. It's one thing to hold somebody accountable for achieving success on a particular project. It's another thing to hold somebody accountable to their growth and their development. And tying some of the accountabilities to a development plan is going to make it that much stickier and make the accountability more real. And it isn't just a matter of getting through a particular success factor and checking it off and moving on. It'll close that gap of performance if it's tied to some sort of development goal.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the other things that's been coming up a lot in the last maybe 6 or 9 months when I'm speaking to these Vistage groups is that the leaders are complaining, I just gave this person a promotion 6 months ago, and they feel like, well, so when's my next promotion? When am I getting more? Which, by the way, is usually code for I just want to make more money, but that's another story. But they don't understand why 6 months, like, I got it. Let me move on to the next thing. Well, if you're using these job scorecards and somebody is excelling in every one of those success factors, then the conversation around development should be if you are going to be prepared for the next logical role. We don't want to just drop you in it and hope it doesn't explode. We want to prepare you in advance. So let's look at the job scorecard for that job and say, all right, what do you think you're going to need to be prepared to be successful in that before we throw you into it? And that goes into a development plan. And the development plan has a measurable time-based goal. They used to call them SMART goals. They now realize if it's at least measurable and time-based,
Then you
you're
got
good.
them all.
Yeah. So if I need to get better at delegating, well, then I need to be like on a project where I get to do some of the delegating. And that means I have to give people feedback on whether or not they did it. I need to hold people accountable. And right. So there's so much more about it. And so you can have a measurable time-based goal in the development plan and then track progress against that. And then the individual just doesn't feel like their next promotion is waiting on your whimsical approach to promotion. They're seeing that they're being prepared. So when the opening comes up, they are at least worthy of being considered.
Right. So, and this is important. So it's one thing that to define the accountability, to have somebody hold you accountable, but it really at the end of the day needs to be tied to something bigger. Right. And whether it's a development plan or whatever that you're looking to use as your growth mechanism, the accountability needs to feed into that.
And everybody gets a development plan. I don't care if you're the person who just has to come in and make the donuts. Over time, recipes change, there's gluten-free, there's new sprinkles. So you can't just be locked, well, this is the way we've always done it, right? So what do we have to do to develop this person so they're open to new ways and they're willing to experiment and they grow in even if they just want to come in and make the donuts?
Sure. So accountability is not easy. There's a lot to it. It isn't just saying, give me more of this and expect it to happen. It's difficult. It's even more challenging into today's environment. There are tools to make it a little bit easier in scorecarding and processes to make accountability a little bit more achievable. Using outside resources is always a good way to improve one's accountability. Particularly when it comes to the review process and however that is played out. AI isn't quite there yet, but it may be able to supplement some sort of accountability process. And the important part is to make the accountability sticky and part of some sort of growth or development plan.
One thing that we didn't mention, and that is I just realized number 2 has a little typo, just so you realize we realized that personal accountability is at an all-time low, not all is at an all-time low. But one of the things we realize is in the absence of knowing how to hold people accountable, especially with people working remote or hybrid, there are organizations that are putting in what I call surveillance systems to try to hold people accountable. My one cousin has it. If she hasn't moved her mouse so many times, and of course, then there's something in AI that pretends to move the mouse for you. And, if they're not in front of their camera and all this other kind of stuff. Quite frankly, as behavior experts, we have found that creates a very adversarial us versus them. It's not about the quality of the work. It's not about giving people an appreciation for the accomplishments they have had. And it feels very Big Brother-ish. So we strongly encourage you to think carefully. There may be situations where those things make a lot of sense. But in the US, at least, for not just for offshoring or whatever, but in the US, that isn't really the type of leadership that's appreciated by the majority of the workforce.
No.
Okay.
Couple of questions. Again, drop any questions you have into the chat. If we don't get to them, we'll be sure to answer them outside of the session. But we had a couple that were sent in. One question is, if you're trying to establish within a culture an accountability that you really haven't had in that culture before, how do you start? So if you've had an organization that's kind of winging it, loose, and you realize that's not cutting it, and you need to put in some more structure, how do you start accountability process, and what does that look like?
We always suggest starting with a job scorecard, and we understand it's going to take you a long time to have them in all your roles. But you didn't get to where you are overnight. So just how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. But taking the job scorecards, and what's really important is including the people who may be in those roles, other people who interact with those folks, who understand what it takes to do the job well, or who might be impacted if it's done poorly. The key here is making sure people understand this does not take away from all of the wonderful things you've done for us through the years. But moving forward, we know there are going to be different expectations, and we want to make sure we're clear about what we need moving forward without taking away from anything you've done behind us. But it really does come from getting everybody together and getting them on the same page. This isn't just something to be handed down to.
And start with the leadership team. If you need to change your accountability culture, you need to start at the top. The leader needs to have their scorecard. They need to be held accountable to their scorecard before they can expect the rest of the organization to do that.
I loved one of our clients, talk about walking the talk. One of our clients runs a pretty good sized CPA firm, and he thought this was a great idea. And we started with creating a job scorecard for his job. And all of his direct reports helped build that out. And then he looked at everybody and said, what if I have to get all green on those success factors before I accept a bonus? So he tied his own compensation to his performance on the job scorecard.
Sure.
That's putting your money where your mouth is.
And then when
it starts with him,
everybody takes it
serious. It's really hard for the next layer down to make excuses, right?
Yeah, so everybody needs a scorecard, including the leadership team. That's the best way to get culturally around a culture of accountability. And so we had a couple of other questions. How do you hold peers accountable, and how do you hold your boss accountable? Same kind of deal. If everybody's got a scorecard, the scorecard is the accountability tool.
Especially if the peers and the boss and the direct reports have all contributed to building that scorecard. There are a couple of other things in our goal alignment exercises, and you can always run back and check out a previous webcast we've had on goal alignment. But when everybody understands what the ultimate project goal is, that's usually when it comes up with peers. Here's what we need to accomplish by the project, and what do each of us have to accomplish every step along the way. When somebody goes down. It's the same way in sports. If you have a football team and one of your linebackers goes down, you'll see a running back understand he's got to come in behind that person to give the guy with the ball an off running back to block for the next person to run with the ball. If everybody understands what everybody else is held accountable for, you can backfill those situations and help each other out. But otherwise, you have no idea. You can't leave a hole in that front line.
So here's a way you can give us some feedback on the session. Give us some ideas on what you're doing for holding your team accountable. Give us some ideas on what you would like in future webcasts. And then you'll also get a copy of the job scorecard that we've talked about so much, which is the foundation for accountability and clarity.
And for the upcoming webcast, one of the things we're seeing more and more, and we're really loving it, is when you register for a future webcast, if you have some questions you're hoping we answer, put it in your registration form, and the odds are good, like we did today, we'll put it into the talking points. So we'd love to have those questions and make sure we're tailoring it to what you're really needing.
Yeah, so stick with us. Next month, we're going to be talking about the best step in the hiring process is the core values exercise, and we're going to talk a lot about how to implement that and the value behind that. May, we're going to talk about aligning your leadership development to the vision, so that you're heading in the direction or everybody's heading in the right direction. EQ is going to be the topic in June. We're hearing more and more about EQ and the importance of it now that AI is becoming a bigger part of the workplace, and the empathy needs to be focused on a little bit more. And then goal alignment. You mentioned goals earlier. We're going to talk about a really cool tool and approach to get everybody rowing in the same direction on goals.
Yeah. So I'm sure many of you have some questions or thoughts about culture and core values and how to screen for that before you get this person in your organization wreaking havoc. So please, when you register, give us those thoughts and we'll be happy to incorporate them.
We'll see you next April on Core Values.